Well, I guess since we only have one voting item, mostly discussion today, I'll go ahead and start reading the introductory materials just in the interest of time. And if folks join, we can determine if we have a quorum when we get to the voting items. But first, I will go ahead and read the notice of non-discrimination. So you're invited to participate in this transportation planning process, regardless of your color, race, national origin, included limited English proficiency, religion, creed, gender, ancestry, ethnicity, disability, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, veteran status or background. Now move to reading the virtual meeting guidelines. All participants will join this meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself in Zoom to include your first name, last name, and your affiliation. After the roll call, board members may mute and unmute themselves. Always remain muted unless actively speaking. And to participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function by clicking on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with a raise hand button or the reactions button in the toolbar, and the chair will then call on participants. If you are on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. And if you have any technical difficulties, please contact Erin McGuire via the chat box or by email at emaguire@ctps.org or by phone at 857-702-3681. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1, Level AA standards, and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in the meeting, please contact Erin McGuire of MPO staff at emaguire@ctps.org or by phone at 857-702-3681. And with that, we can move on to introductions. So I am Derek Cravat here representing MassDOT's Office of Transportation Planning, MAPC.
Good afternoon, Eric Barassa with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council.
Right. Town of Arlington. City of Boston, Transportation Department. City of Framingham. Okay. Town of Medway. City of Newton.
Hi, I'm David Kozis, City of Newton Public Works Department.
Okay. Town of Norwood.
Steve Olenoff, Trick Subregion.
Great, thanks, Steve. Inner Core. Somerville. And Tom. RTAC.
Hunter Dickens Supervisory Council here.
Great. And do we have anyone from the MBTA Advisory Board? Not seeing any, so I think we have 5 members present. Can you remind me, Srileka, if that's the quorum?
I think 5 is a quorum.
Okay.
I believe it is.
Okay, great. Sounds good. And don't think I missed any members, but if I did, please feel free to chime in. Don't see anyone else though. You can move on to the next slide, which is public comments. Is there anybody that would like to make a public comment at this time? All right, seeing none. If you do have any comments during the meeting, please feel free to raise your hand or put something in the chat. You can also email Srileka, SMURTHY@ctps.org if you have a comment at any point. We'll go to the next item. I'll ask for a motion and second to endorse the summary of the March 30th, 2023 UPWP committee meeting. Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you, Eric.
Second.
Okay, motion I made and seconded. Are there any comments or questions on the minutes? All right, seeing none, I'll call the roll. Mouseat OTP, yes. Eric Barassa.
Yes, Eric Barassa.
David Kozis.
David Kozis, yes.
Steve Olenoff.
Yes.
Leonard Diggins.
Yes.
Okay, motion carries. Thank you, everybody. The next item on the agenda, which I think the bulk of the meeting today, is for the universe of proposed studies for the federal fiscal year 2024 Unified Planning Work Program. So I know that the results of the ranking survey were posted online on the meeting calendar, and there were a handful of scenarios, I think 6 total, that Srilekha will walk us through here. So I'll turn it over to Srilekha to go through those scenarios.
Thank you, Derek, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's committee meeting. My presentation today will be fairly short, as I want to leave ample time for discussion. I want to open a discussion with a bit of context setting. The Discrete Studies Program is just one part of all of the work laid out in the UPWP. The majority of work outlined in this document is accomplished through program work, and discrete studies are intended to enhance and supplement our ongoing tasks. This has also influenced the rationale behind some of the studies chosen on the staff recommended list. Staff attempted to strike a balance between studies that could have impacts on ongoing program work and those that are more one-off studies, which do not have any predicted impacts at this time on our ongoing tasks. That being said, we have had discussions over the last few meetings of this committee regarding this committee being involved in program work more in the coming years, and staff are working on a strategy for program managers to present their work to this committee on an ongoing basis to foster a closer relationship between this committee and more of the work undertaken in the UPWP. Next slide, please, Erin. So with that context, I'll jump right into presenting the results from the surveys we disseminated. The results have been posted on the meeting calendar for today, and I encourage you all to have it open for reference. We had 5 committee members and 6 staff members participate in the survey. The raw results displayed a range of priorities across both groups, and there was little overlap between the top 5 studies between the 2 groups. Ultimately, the staff recommended list attempted to strike that balance that I had noted earlier. The studies that were chosen can be funded at a range of levels and in a variety of combinations. Part of the decision I am requesting you all to make is about how many studies you'd like to fund, whether that's 2 at a relatively high level or 3 to 4 at lower levels. That is part of the decision I am asking you all to make. Next slide, please. So on the slide, we have the staff recommended list of studies. TE1, applying conveyal to TIP project scoring. M2, exploring roadway pricing engagement with local stakeholders. L2, opportunities for the MPO to support TOD. M1, lab and municipal parking phase 2. R2, strategies for environmental outreach and engagement. And A1, parking in bike lanes, strategies for safety and prevention. There was only one study which appeared in the top 5 of both the staff and committee rankings, and that is M1, lab and municipal parking phase 2. Next slide, please. Staff came up with these 6 draft scenarios based on the total budget for the Discrete Studies Program and the range of levels at which each of these studies can be funded. These are draft scenarios. Each of the 6 studies that staff recommended can be funded at a range of levels, and the committee can choose to fund any combination of these that make sense. I will also note that the descriptions of each of these studies will change. Once we have the final list of studies, staff will go back and rewrite descriptions before the document is presented to you for endorsement. And then additionally, the work scope, which will be presented to the MPO board at the beginning of the next fiscal year, will have space for alterations in some of the details of those scopes. Today, I'm asking this committee to discuss these studies and potential scenarios and provide some guidance on a final list of studies to fund. I'm happy to answer any questions I can about these studies, and we have a number of staff available to speak to any specific questions on studies. So with that, I will turn it back over to the chair.
Great, thanks, Srilekha. So I think there's also, just for reference, in case folks don't have it on the meeting calendar, there is a document that has the studies sort of laid out by scenario with the titles of the studies as well, and the rankings. And yes, thanks, Srilekha, for putting that in the chat. So if folks find that useful as well to reference here. So there's a little more detail on that. handout, but I'll open it up now to any comments that our members have. Yeah, I see David's hand first, so go ahead, David.
Okay, great, thank you. So there's always a lot of great projects. I'd be happy with almost any of these, to tell you the truth. I think I don't see T1 on here. I think I would like to make a plug for T1. That's the ways to reduce automobile trips to schools. It's just, I feel like more than almost anything else that I do, just spend, can someone mute? Okay, thank you. I just feel like more than anything else, I probably spend more time thinking about how to get students to and from school safely and not in a car, making it safer to walk, making it safer to bicycle or easier in some way, or on the bus, policies around the school bus or even the MBTA, designing infrastructure to make it easier and safer to walk. So, I mean, I spend so much time on this. I'm not sure what new ideas might come out of this, but I think it's one of the most important things that I do, at least, and I'm willing to give it a shot, but I don't see it on the list.
Thanks, David. Note that. And I think, yeah, I think we can definitely think about proposing new ones if, yeah, depending on what others say. So I think at the end of the discussion, yeah, we'll come back and potentially can look at other options, but I'll go over to Leonard.
Thanks, and sorry about the background sound here. I'm in a rather public environment this time. So what I found.
You got muted again, Len.
I'm sorry.
No
So
problem.
where'd you lose me? Because I wasn't even touching the keyboard. That's interesting. Maybe someone muted me. So where'd you lose me?
I don't think we heard really anything. So
Okay, sorry about
start
that.
from the
Okay,
beginning.
so
Yeah, no
so
problem.
sorry. So what I found interesting is that between staff ranking and the committee ranking, it's almost an inverse correlation, except for that one study where we matched. And so if I were going to select, I would select the studies where there is the least difference or the smallest delta, which would give us, A1, M1, and L1. And there is one scenario that has all of those, and that's scenario 5, and it throws in R2. So just going by the number, that's what I would select. If we're going to go out of the listed studies, that I understand where David's coming from on that, and I also understood, when we talked about this, if not the last time, the time before that, was that the school study was kind of incorporated into the work that the state does for the state school. But still, I'm fine with going and considering LT1 in addition to that. And so kind of along those lines, I would like to have you repeat again, what was the rationale for not including T3 from the Raw University regarding car sharing? Because when we had left not the last meeting, but one before that, there was consideration about putting that in the survey, but then there was a decision not to put it in the survey. And what was the rationale for that again?
Yeah, I think the idea behind maybe leaving out the car sharing study was that was based on some comments that we received from OTP that maybe this isn't the best time to do such a study, and also there was a bit of question among the staff about capacity and who would be able to do such work.
All right, because it's pretty much a literature review, seems like to me, and then come up with some guidelines. And it's so far ranging, and I think what it could accomplish. Sorry about that. I muted myself because it is a little noisy, yeah. I mean, in terms of equity, environmental aspects, so if we're gonna go outside and this discourages us from considering other studies, I throw that one back in, but one way or another, I'm gonna do the research on this, but it's just a matter of whether or not there's a guide that comes out for the rest of the region, because it is just so compelling to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Len. I think that Rebecca also had a hand raised earlier. So Rebecca, did you have comments on the school related study?
Yeah, thanks, Derek. I was planning on responding to that, and I just wasn't sure if you wanted to wait on that or not, but I'd be happy to
Sure.
speak to
No,
that.
yeah, I think it's appropriate now. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think that the way that the study has been written is kind of more of a congestion focus, which I think is appropriate and can be kind of considered there, and potentially as part of the CMP work. But in addition to that, with the safety piece, we're planning on looking at this as part of the Safe Streets and Roads for All action plan. One of the concepts that we're looking at is safe routes to school. And so I would say that a lot of this would be covered under that program. And so there may be some redundancy here if we end up funding it as part of the discrete study.
Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, Amira.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm just asking some clarification questions. Rebecca, you were referring to study T3 or T1 in relation to schools. And also Sri Lanka, you did mention a comment on the M1 lab study. I just wanted to know if you could refresh that memo that you said.
Regarding M1, I think I noted that was the one study that appeared in the top 5 ranking for both the committee survey and the staff survey.
Thank you for that clarification.
And Amir, I was referring to T1.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you both.
All right. So it sounds like so far, Idolen had mentioned scenario 5. I think in my review of these scenarios as well, I think out of the ones listed, that was my kind of top one as well, just from my own rankings that I had provided. So curious what other folks think as far as which scenarios stand out to you as being kind of preferred, which ones are most in line with your ranking. Are there any adjustments to the scenarios you'd like to see or support for any of the ones as listed?
Just noted to be digesting this whole list
Right.
in comparison to the additional
Yep.
UPWP list.
Right. Yeah, no, for sure. It is a bit of information. So no problem if folks need extra time or if there's, I don't know if Sri Lanka, what's the process that are you looking for kind of a vote today on a preferred scenario, or I guess it might be helpful to give a sense of timing on next steps.
Yeah, if possible, I would like to see if we can get a final list of studies to fund, whether that comes from one of these draft scenarios or whether we come up with another one in this meeting. And then next steps after this, if we do have that final list, is staff will go back and write those descriptions to go into chapter 4 of the UPWP. And then the next time I come in front of the committee, I'll be presenting the draft document for release for public comment.
Great. Thanks for that. Good. Sandy.
Yeah, thank you. So we're not an official member of this committee, but I just wanted to express that, kind of following up from the conversation that Claire Baker from Arlington brought up at the last meeting of this committee about the need for transit and transportation to work more hand in hand with development and growth, that the MBTA would be strongly supportive of any scenario that includes L1. We think that would be a high priority. We're trying to do a lot of work on our side to link transit and land use, and would very much enjoy partnering with the MPO on such a study.
Great. Thanks, Sandy. Okay. Any others' thoughts? I guess thoughts on whether folks feel ready to recommend a stereo. Steve, I see your thanks. Go ahead.
Yeah, so looking at all these scenarios, R2 is in a lot of them, but at all some places it's 35,000, others 30,000. It goes as low as 20,000, 30,000, 25,000. It's so what are the differences between the different funding levels as far as what we're getting and what we'll be doing on that?
So,
Yeah,
go
I'm
ahead.
actually gonna ask Stella if she could speak to that a little more, since this was a study she proposed.
Yeah, sure. So the study itself, as a refresher, was to explore opportunities for greater engagement of environmental stakeholders in the MPO region, essentially sort of scoping out what our role in this space can be as we grow our resiliency and engagement programs, as well as just building relationships and kind of building some foundations for future work in both of these programs. And to address the differences in funding allocations across the different scenarios, I think in our proposal, we put a range. I think it was 20 to 35. So this sort of represents, different amounts within that range. And really, I think it represents sort of different levels that we could take this work to, depending on how much funding we receive. So, I would say at the low end, we can sort of build that foundation and lay some groundwork. And then at the higher levels of funding, should we receive that, we could really take it a step further in sort of the goals of the study and as proposed and the relationship building aspects.
Thanks, Stella. Yeah, it does seem like that one in particular can be a little flexible as far as the funding levels, just varying levels of work. Okay. Others? Yep, Len?
Well, in the vein of it's okay to have a shorter meeting. If you want a motion, just let me know and I'll be happy to make a motion for you.
Okay, I appreciate that, Larry. Yeah, I guess I think we should do that. I'll ask one more time. Just generally, if members feel like, because we haven't heard from a few folks, I just want to make sure everyone feels like they have enough information and time. Eric, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, sorry. One reason I'm quiet is I'm sort of, I prepped a little bit for the meeting, but I didn't get the full look at all the scenarios. I missed that in the memo. And so I'm looking at all of them right now. And just process question again, we're looking at for the next time we meet to actually have made a decision so that the project descriptions can be provided. Was that what you said, Srilekha?
The next time that we meet, I'm hoping to present the draft document. So the draft document will also have like the updated project descriptions.
And when is that?
I'm hoping late May, early June. We are definitely well into development, but it'll depend on a few more factors.
You'd like to get a scenario from us today and then go and flesh that out.
If possible. I don't want to rush the committee into a decision, but we can also come back and discuss the descriptions a little further.
Okay. I'm trying to think, when do we meet? When is the next NPO meeting?
I know May 4th. There's been, oh, go ahead, taking it.
I was gonna say, I can speak to that. May 4th is the next scheduled one, although it's possible that the agenda could be light enough where there could be a proposal to cancel that MPO meeting, but we haven't made that decision yet with the chair and vice chair. And then also there is a plan to have an A&F committee meeting on that day as well. That's all for May 4th.
And then after that one, it would be May 18th, right? So it's
Yes.
Possible that, yep. That would be the next date. But we could always do a May 11th meeting. We could also, if folks are comfortable having some write-ups sent around to the members and provide comments that way, as opposed to, meeting to discuss. If we do come to this agreement on a scenario, then that's one alternative option as well, is to review in writing. So just throwing that out there, but anything else, Eric? I didn't know if you.
No, I'm still.
You're good. Okay, yes, no problem. Yeah. I'll go to David. Unless Tegan, did you have more on that topic that you want to?
Just on that note, I think Eric said something about, or I think he said something about sharing the write-ups with maybe before a full decision is made, but I do just want to, I think that it matters to staff to do the write-ups to understand the scale of the, the cost. And so that makes it sort of interdependent, but I mean, sure, like, correct me if I'm wrong and you've heard differently from others, but I do think it's important to give us a sense of scale through this conversation to be able to make those write-ups reasonable.
Yes, I agree. I think having an estimated budget would definitely affect the description or like the scope of a given study.
Good. Tom.
Thanks, and I apologize. I get into the meeting about 15 minutes late. I was just kind of going back to I think scenario 5. That was one of the ones I think Derek that you might have been leaning towards, and like on. But I do have a question, like on A1, parking and bike lane strategy for safety and prevention. So I'm thinking, we're going to spend, that was one of the lowest ones that we ranked. And I think our thought process is like, what strategies are you really going to do on that? Other than its enforcement, I think more than anything. And to be honest, the police aren't really enforcing this. We see it in Somerville. I know they're seeing it in Cambridge. The police, I think they're hesitant to do that. So that was, I think, one of the ones that we ranked low because we just feel like, there's not a lot of different strategies that you can do other than, things that you've already done. I mean, we see people with the PVC barriers, that they put up and people are just driving over them, and so, that was one of the reasons why we had ranked that one so low. But then in a lot of the other scenarios, some of the things that we, ranked high are like scenario 4. They have a few of ours that were high. Scenario 6 has a couple, and then some that were in the middle. Scenario 3, same thing. Scenario 2, it really comes down to, this is always a hard decision. Every year that I've tried to do this, it's always been difficult. And I don't know if do we want to look at each scenario and trying to talk it through, or, or do you want somebody just to propose a scenario and go with that? Or does the committee want more information? So I guess those are my 3 options right now.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Tom. I think I'll sort of chew on that. I'll go to David and Len, and then we'll come back to that process question. Go ahead, David. I apologize if I cut you off earlier.
It's okay. I don't know. Like I said before, I think any of these are fine. Yeah. I would go for any of them. Scenario 5 is fine with me. I did notice that R2 is in every one of these scenarios, and it didn't score that well. So I mean, it's not a lot of money, but I'm guessing that staff strongly thinks that it would be useful. This has to do with, I guess, trying to get more feedback from the environmental advocates or something, or encourage them to participate more in some way. And that's fine, I guess I lost my point, but I think I would be fine with any of these really.
Thanks, David. No, that is a good point to think about, that that one is in each of them. That's something to consider for folks. And something to think about for sure. I'll go to Leonard.
Yeah, well, I mean, David, actually, I mean, I think he scored pretty high for staff, right? It's like 4.5. So that's kind of like the highest, I mean, in the staff ranking. So I think one of the reasons perhaps in all of them is because you can adjust the scope of it, so that you can price it differently, so it can kind of like fit in any of the holes, that are left, when you put in other studies, to get more studies. And for Tom's benefit, one of the reasons I've specified scenario 5, just in case you came in afterwards, is that it contains the studies that has the closest match between the staff's selections, rankings, and our selection. So that's kind of doing it by the numbers, and R2 is one that does have the biggest divergence between staff and the committee, but as I said, I think it's there because it's so malleable in terms of the scope. And if I were to do anything differently in scenario 5, it would be to replace it with the Conveil project, because I think that could have that could kind of maybe give us an additional way of scoring projects. I know that scored high for staff, but it didn't score high for the advisory council. But certainly the advisory council is big into active transportation. And we might, in the case of safety, it might find like other ways maybe of having people park. Instead of maybe like parking parallel to the street, maybe they can park at an angle. Then that would provide for parking and safety, because people wouldn't be opening doors into the stream of cycle traffic. So I think it's worth exploring. And for 20K, I think it's a good deal. That's it. Thank you.
Hey, Leonard, I just want on yours, if you on scenario 5, what would you take out to put in TE1?
Well, I would swap out the lab study, because we've recently, I think we were in the process of doing a lab study, or we just did it. And then when I asked Mead about it, although there would be some benefit from doing the study right after the previous one, because people still in place, there wasn't a big savings from it. So I would say we could get the results from the first lab study, we digest them, and then do the second one. But that would be the only reason. But I'm hard pressed to push for that one, because it didn't, in the discussions with the advisory council, it was not big on my colleague's agenda. And certainly staff versus committee didn't score high either. So I mean, the difference between staff and our committee was pretty wide on that one. So that's why I would just kind of stick with excuse me, let me get back to M1 on that one, because that was the only one that had a match, 7.6 on both, which isn't the highest score, but still, I mean, it's above 8, it's above 9, it's above half. Thank you.
Fun. Steve?
Yes, I was going to ask about that M1. First of all, M1, it's only there, that's the only scenario that it's in. And it's $70,000, which is also, it's the highest one. Well, yeah, it equals the highest one anywhere. And so my question is, because it's based upon continuation of the current one, but the current one hasn't been done. Do we know anything so far from the first one that we know that we want to continue on, or that would be worthwhile to continue on with this? Does anyone know that?
Yeah, I'll ask Rose to speak on this. This is a study that she's been working on.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. We've really just kicked off this study in earnest, and phase 1 of this study is sort of the foundational work to get to an answer on this question. So what we're doing right now is talking with lab and municipal property developers and municipal planners to sort of understand what the challenges are with parking requirements, what people are requiring, what policies are in place. And the end result of the study this year will be to come up with a methodology that will help us rigorously look at the parking occupancy and parking needs at these types of facilities. What phase 2 is proposing to do is to then take that methodology and bring it to lab and municipal parking, lab and life science facility parking sites, and really understand how that parking is being used. That being said, I dug a little bit more into the budget this week and sort of looked at some options. And I think we could do this study relatively robustly for closer to $45,000. So we could definitely lower this budget amount if the study were to be selected.
So how much are you spending on phase 1?
We have $80,000 allotted for phase 1.
Yeah, so 80 plus 70. Yeah, I think that's a big consideration, whether we should be spending that much money on a single study, given that, the money is so tight overall.
But just, would it make sense to wait for the results of that study before we decide to go on to phase 2?
Any thoughts on that, Rose?
I mean, the end result of phase 1 is to just create a methodology to be able to collect the data. So, I could see there potentially being a little bit of benefit in having time to digest the information, but I can also see benefit in leveraging the relationships that we're building right now to continue to go out and get to those sites and start the data collection. As I said, this year is sort of foundational work to get to where we can really understand that what's driving parking conflicts at these lab developments. So we won't have that answer without the data collection piece.
This is actually a pretty big issue for a lot of towns and cities and on this, because what our office buildings are now being changed into labs, and then that's a very big important question, is how much parking should be provided. So yeah.
Yep.
So you said you could reduce it to 45,000 from the 70?
Yeah, we could definitely do a robust study for 45,000. I think we could even collect something like 15 sites, which would give us a good amount of information for something closer to 35.
Yeah. So I think I would be in favor of keeping it in at 45,000. That'll give us room to substitute something else if we want on that.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, that is important to note, because if that does drop, that frees up another 25,000 in that scenario, right? So things to think about as far as maybe either slotting something else in or combining something in a different way. So keep that in mind. David?
Well, I mean, I kind of think that the lab and municipal parking, I mean, it is a big issue I'm not even sure how many cities and towns, maybe a few, maybe more than there were before. But I still kind of think that reducing trips around schools is a study that could be useful for every single community. And the staff really think that there's nothing really different that can be looked at here that's not already being covered by other work elsewhere.
On that. Yeah, Rebecca?
Yeah, I think from the safety perspective, it will be covered in the Safe Streets and Roads for All program. The way that this study has been summarized is more with the congestion focus. And, I think if that's what is of interest, then I think that it's worth considering. But if it's the safety component, I would say that piece is already going to be covered under the Safe Streets and Roads for All.
But what about policies, like setting your bus fees at a certain rate, or, adding infrastructure to encourage alternatives? Is that all covered somewhere? Or
I would
maybe
say
we don't know that yet.
The infrastructure piece, certainly, from a policy perspective, we as part of the Safe Streets and Roads for All, we are looking at policies, so we could look to include that there as well. But I would open it up to others that would want to respond to that.
Any others?
And again, I don't feel that strongly about it. I just, making these comments.
No, it was one that scored high from the committee, and I think I definitely see value in it as well. I think that there's potential there if it's not being covered. I think that, especially when we think about study ideas that could get into building that bench of tip projects that we talk about all the time, like if there are projects in the vicinity of school zones, I don't know if things have been looked at from that perspective yet. So I think there's certainly potential there. I agree. I think that it would also be one that, thinking about these study ideas, that one seems to have relevance for providing communities with resources, as opposed to, maybe some of the other ones that only are relevant to a handful of communities or more of a benefit on other issues. But Tegan, go ahead.
Yeah, I certainly understand the attraction to the topic and the study, and I won't dispute that in any way. When we've come back to you with these sort of compiled scenarios, one of the major considerations is what the rest of the work program looks like. And as you know, sometimes we talk about it in the context of we can fold it into something else, but also when you think about the scale of the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant that we have and the amount of work that will be, I think that is just, that scale of work compared to something smaller that sort of overlaps with it. It sometimes isn't a really efficient way for us to sort of deal with a body of work, to have a separate independent small study that has to be separately scoped, separately approved by the board, and then have a separate, deliverable. Now, again, that's not to say that there's not still value in having those elements of it, but that's part of the discussion when we do lean towards recommending including or not including something, even if it's a very appealing or attractive subject. So, but beyond that, I'd have to defer back to staff from a more technical perspective, sorry about the cat, as to whether they, there still does appear to be a value of a separate standalone kind of like policy look, for example, individually at this topic. We could talk about that a bit more, but I think our feeling going into this was that wasn't an obvious sort of path forward that made sense to us as staff. And again, I'm trying to speak more broadly here because I don't know all the specifics about this one study, but that's the general tactic that we take in assessing these and coming back to you.
Thanks, Tegan. That's helpful. Eric, did you have your hand raised?
I mean, I did. I was gonna, ask a question and comment about the parking study, but I think Rose completely covered it. And yeah, I don't know. I feel like we might just need a little bit more time to kind of digest this and maybe need to, or maybe need to like do some type of offline, like from the meeting, like rank these scenarios, or maybe given that this information about the parking one could actually be reduced, maybe that changes a scenario. I don't know, maybe staff could take some of this conversation back and come back with something. I don't know if we're going to get a consensus today.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
if somebody wants to, if it sounded like we were kind of moving for scenario 5, but then I don't know, things changed a little.
Yeah. I think there's certainly more to consider. I do want to just acknowledge that we're at 2 o'clock. It seems like there's a lot of hands raised, so I don't have to leave, but I just want to make sure folks are okay sticking around for a little bit. I don't know if we will be taking a vote, but since we started late, just wanted to note that. I think last time we went till 2:15 as well and started at 1:15. So just wanted to throw that out there. But I'll move on to the folks with hands raised. So Sandy, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So I guess this is kind of a follow up to the question that I asked at the last meeting as well. And I don't intend it to be combative at all, even though it might come off slightly that way. But Tegan, you just said that it's kind of inefficient to separately scope and present these small studies to the board, and totally understand that. So I guess part of my question is, we're looking in the scenarios here at studies like R2 and M2, which both seem like they are that precisely that kind of thing that could fall under another program, right? And so I guess I'm wondering how you're making decisions around differentiating, doing those as discrete studies versus including them in the public engagement program or multimodal mobility program in some way.
May I respond, Derek?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, no, Sandy, no, I think it's a really great question and a good follow-up to what I was saying. In certain cases, we are looking at, again, it as inefficient, and in some cases, there's a strategy to having something as a standalone study. So in different cases, we can internally make different recommendations based on, sometimes it is actually strategic for us to put together a separate scope of work. In particular, I feel like there are a couple of ways that comes up, and I'll just again highlight some of them that I know at a high level that have come up. But I think when we get down to those specific studies, I would defer back to the kind of the experts or the folks proposing those studies. But for example, if we feel like there's an area of work here that's related to aspects of the different programs that we're doing, but none of the work programs, nor is there sort of like a structure in place to pull staff from across those different groups or programs together to talk about the topic at hand and to sort of make some advancement, then that might be something where it is strategic to have an individual study with a separate deliverable that has a separate budget to it, right? Sometimes also just depending on the type of product, like if there's a value in producing something like a guide, that can be useful as a standalone deliverable and a standalone budget and project. So there are a variety of ways in which it could make sense. I think what I've been hearing staff argue is that in some cases, like for example, when we're looking at a really big broad scale level of effort engaged in the Safe Streets and Roads for All program, that's a very big multi-million-dollar piece of work that will be engaging with consultants that can and should touch on many aspects of what some of the studies, actually multiple of the studies, I would say, in the universe can address. So it's a judgment call, and again, that's why I'm happy to sort of continue that conversation. And the other studies you brought up, I think were, can you remind us again, and then maybe staff, if they want to speak to those specific studies, you can.
Yeah, I was thinking specifically about kind of R2 and M2, which both seem like they're primarily about engagement, although I see also the point that you're making that they will involve staff from across the agency.
Yeah. So I think both of those are sort of also the congestion pricing topic, roadway pricing topic doesn't fit neatly into any of the areas of work that we do. And I think Stella brought up related to the strategies for environmental outreach and engagement, that really is like kind of a cross collaboration between different focus areas of our work as well. And so that's why I think staff were enthusiastic to put those forward as independent studies. But again, that does not mean that that's an absolute. This is us trying to give you, our best guidance. It looks like other staff, if you're willing, Mr. Chair, might want to speak to that a bit.
Yeah, Judy, did you want to add on to that? Yeah.
Yeah, I would just add for R2, staff had started compiling a list of groups that we really wanted to engage with on environmental topics as they're becoming kind of more and more talked about. And there's a lot more funding out there to do resilience work and to do mitigation. And it just became a daunting task that we really wanted to have dedicated time to build those relationships in the near term so that they could really be reflected in our body of work, in MPO work as soon as possible, really. I think otherwise this is going to take maybe a scale of years to build the connections that, we could have a couple of months dedicated to reach out to people, see how they want to be involved in the MPO process, kind of educate them on what we do and get that going sooner than later, while these topics are so hot right now, if that makes sense. And there just isn't time or budget to do that with our current programs.
Thanks, Judy.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Move to Leonard.
Well, it's interesting that you put it that way because it's almost as if it's just a person power issue as opposed to a research effort. And it almost makes me think that could we divert the resources, the money from someplace else to just kind of hire someone to help out with that. It would get the job done unless I miss a subtlety in that. But nonetheless, I just put that out there as an aside. I wasn't really even going to say that until I heard the very last part of what you said. Really what I'm here to say, two things. One is that I'm perfectly fine with taking more time for this process. I thought maybe we needed to come to a conclusion quicker. So I was like, oh, I'm kind of there. And so let's just, I can make a motion. But I'm happy to talk about this one for as long as you, chair, wants, other members of the committee wants to talk. But since we are thinking a little bit more, I know that the council was really very big on towards regional transit fare and service integration. That ranked pretty high with us. It's like our second, well, actually with the committee ranked pretty high. I also know the advisory council ranked very high. With staff, it's at 7. And so if we are going to save some money, from M2 or M1, I know it's not quite the 40K that is the bottom range for this one, but maybe if we could get like the cost for the bottom range of this a little bit more, we could maybe like squeeze it in or maybe do it over a couple of years. But I know it make the advisory council happy, and I know it make like one very important person to us very, very happy. So that's it. Thank you.
Excellent.
And also one other thing, it may be something that can be done with the coordinated human transportation plan. So if that's the case, that I can certainly understand why staff didn't include that as a study to consider in any other scenarios. That's it. Thank you.
No, thank you. Yeah, and just to speak to that one a little, there is another pot of funding called, I think it's MassDOT directed PL funds, which sort of goes toward transit planning activities. I think that there is almost like a phase 1 of service and fare integration funded through that. So I think that we could consider that for that. And I know Rebecca and I sort of meet to discuss those ones. So that's one we can keep on the table. Yeah. Thank you. Yep. David?
I think it's kind of funny that Leonard just said that you're fine. Taking a little bit more time, because I was just going to say that I felt like we were getting pretty close to a vote before, on scenario 5, and maybe changing a little bit of something, and I'm perfectly fine with that. I did not mean to slow us down or delay us or something, so maybe we are pretty close, and maybe it's not going to take a whole bunch more of going around in circles.
Right. Yeah, and it does look like, Sri Lanka, I think you got the Excel up. You do have a sort of one that looks like a combined scenario that's sort of based on this discussion, which I think is helpful. It seems to put some other ones in there and lowers that dollar amount for allowing municipal parking, and then adds in Conveyal, which I know some folks scored pretty highly. So I see a few hands up though, so I want to make sure we get to those comments from Steve and Tom, and then we can maybe talk about that one. So go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, so what happened to T2? It scored all right, not great, but it's not included anywhere. It's on the review and analysis of community connections shuttles. Why is it focusing on community connections, not shuttles in general? So many towns are trying or want to do shuttles. Some have been successful, some have not been successful. Others just don't know what to do or need some more motivation and some guidance on how to do this. So just the fact that whether you have good shuttle service or not depends on what town you're in, rather than having it something shuttle service available more generally throughout the region. So I would think that would be more important. And so why is it focused that way, and why isn't it being considered here?
So I believe with this one, and Annette or Betsy, please jump in if you feel like you can. This one came directly out of the TIP. So I think this was an effort at least to kind of evaluate the community connections program And I think ultimately the reason why it didn't make the staff recommended list is because staff kind of determined that this could be done within the TIP program itself, and it didn't necessarily have to be a discrete study if it was going to focus on the community connections program itself.
Yeah, I think if you just drop the words community connections and say, you know, and I know there've been studies before about the shuttles, but still, and I know my community, we keep talking about it, and our neighboring communities keep talking about it, and they talk about, you know, should we do it separately or get together with a neighboring community? And it's not quite getting, it's not quite going where it should be at this time, and there's such variance as to success and the attempts to do this. And I know in other RTAs where they do it, like GATRA, they're doing it, they have on-demand shuttle service that's working very well and really serving a number of communities. But in the MBTA area, you know, the MBTA rightfully doesn't have anything to do with shuttle bus service. So each community is left on its own to kind of struggle along. So I think there's a need here for real help to individual communities to get going on shuttle bus service.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I do know there was also a study released in 2020 about operating a successful community shuttle program or projects that, you know, I don't know if that gets.
Yeah,
at
there was
what you're-
a there was a good
that's more
study
different.
on how to market it, which is important to make it successful and all that. But just you know, how to set it up and how to just get everyone together to agree on something, and yeah, there's a the communities are struggling to get this to happen. That's all.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Did you want to speak to that, Annette? Or was it something else?
Yeah, I just wanted to say this was about particularly evaluating shuttles. And I think that sometimes when we're not funding the shuttles, it's really difficult for us to get the data that we can use to evaluate the studies. That's the problem we've always had with these shuttles. So that's one part. And then in terms of organizing to pull together a shuttle, a lot of it is there the demand present? And that's individual to each community, and it's usually focused on density of trips from point to point, whether or not a shuttle will be successful. So that's like, as you said, it really varies by town.
Thank you. You know, with the new spreadsheet up on the board, I wanted to see if we could talk about draft final scenario that came up, because I think that brings in a lot of the different items that we've been talking about today that we were looking at. And, you know, with the adjustment made, I think it was in, what was it, M1? You know, that one looks pretty good to me.
Right.
You know, so I just wanted to put my 2 cents in. I was glad that you were able to put that together.
Yeah, likewise. I think that one seems to get at what some folks are saying.
So it depends. You know, I don't know if you're ready for motions or not, or if people want to talk about that scenario, but I'd be willing to put in a motion if we're ready for to approve that one.
Okay.
Well, I'm not, because I really don't like the loss of A1 and this.
Which one don't you like?
I mean, I really would like to keep A1. Because I mean, the council is very big on supporting active transportation, you know, and so I mean, I can't really. So I mean, I do like A1.
But it's bringing in the TE one that you wanted too.
Well, I mean, I was going to swap out.
I
I was going to swap out TE1 for M1. You know, so I'd be fine with the so.
Well, I think the M1 is kind of important too.
Oh, I hear you. You know. Well, we're hashing this out, so I mean, you were kind of rolling along there, Tom, and I was just saying like, hold on a
Well,
little bit. So we can maybe have some feedback from other people,
oh,
so-
no, that's what I asked for, Len. That's what I
Yeah, no
asked for.
problem. But you're gunning for the motion there. It's like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Hey,
No.
I'm just looking at what, people that were, kind of like honing in on, and actually, to be honest with you, I picked up on TE1 because that was one of the ones that you like, and I agree with. Because hey, we just went through it all, right? And I think that would be an important one to take a look at.
Well, it did score high for staff, but not so high for the committee. And so there was an interesting contrast between that on that one. And which is one reason I wasn't pushing it so hard, So anyways. So I'll shut up and let
That's
it.
fine. No problem. Amira?
Thank you. So I do want to show my support for the final draft scenario. And Leonard, also, so you're not alone. We do show support for A1. However, I want to ask, what adjustment would we make if we were to add A1? I definitely support the more robust study at like 45,000 for M1. So we made that adjustment. What further adjustments are we willing to make in order to add A1, if that's even a possibility?
Thanks, Amira. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Is there any flexibility? David, yeah, go ahead.
Well, what would happen if we have a new draft final scenario that takes out R2 and adds A1?
Or could we bring down the cost of TE1 a bit? I mean, is it adjustable in terms of how much you try to accomplish with it? So
Yeah, Srilek or Betsy.
David, was that what you just said?
Yeah, so we'd have final scenario A and B.
Go ahead, Betsy.
Yes. Hey, so for the Conveil work, TE1, I can speak to, we used Conveil in the 2022 UPWP study, identifying transportation inequities in the Boston region. And I will say there's some scalability to that. It depends on how many kind of different metrics you want to look at. I think our budget was $70,000 for that equity study. So just give you a context of kind of how much work that entailed, how much money that would take to kind of at that level of work. So I think you could scale it back a little bit. It would just be that you may not get, there might be fewer metrics we might look at rather than, a larger suite of metrics.
Okay. That's helpful. Okay. So I know that each additional work scope too can create some, as far as just like getting them approved and logistics. I don't know if there's interest in keeping this to 4 studies instead of 5. I want to open up a whole nother can of worms, but I know we lost, at least we lost Eric. I don't know if there are others on. What do folks think as far as, maybe taking a vote right now versus sending around a poll, maybe just with these 2 scenarios? Just to give folks a little more time. Yeah, go ahead, Len.
Well, I don't know if that answer can back up me, but are you want to talk to that? No. Okay.
It might be a leftover hand.
Yeah. Well, since Eric had to jump, I'm inclined to wait, and get his input.
Okay.
Yeah, unless he conveyed to someone else that he's okay with us voting.
Okay. Yeah, so Srileka, would you be able to send around a poll basically that compares these final 2 scenarios? Is that something that would be feasible?
So just pick one or the other?
Yeah, I think it might be helpful to, I guess just choose one and then maybe have the survey actually list what they are, and if it's possible to throw the descriptions in there, just so it's all in one place, that would be great.
I did want to ask how the committee felt about L1, if that was one that you all definitely want to keep in the scenarios, because that was ranked relatively low by the committee at 9.8. And it kind of was at the middle for staff. And that's one of those studies that could be adjusted to fit into a budget. So if there was another study that was of more interest, I think we could maybe, that one is able to be moved around.
So if I could jump in,
Yeah,
Derek?
go ahead, Len. Yep.
So, because I remember when we were going through this first time, the sense was that we had done TOD related work, and that TOD related work was also being handled elsewhere. I can't remember where, but do you remember your comments about TOD, Eric, Derek?
I think Eric had said that MEPC was doing a lot of work with technical assistance, especially with 3A of the Zoning Act, and it seemed like, it was maybe more in MEPC's wheelhouse. I think there was definitely some discussion around that, but
Yeah, that was my sense too,
Yeah.
so that's why I simply included it because, as I said, the difference between the two groups, staff and committee, it had a lower difference, smaller difference, but I don't feel strongly about it, I know Sandy does though.
Yeah, it's very true, but they
Yeah.
don't exactly.
okay. Well, how does you like if there's, potentially a third one here with swapping out TOD with environmental outreach and engagement? Perhaps that's a final. I don't want to recreate the whole ranking survey, but at the same time, I think this is a good discussion and it's whittling it down with this committee's input. I think we got some new information today too about the level of funding for municipal parking, which changes things a bit. So I think this is to me, this feels like a good next step. I don't want to rush this. It's important to get it right. So I think it's worth sending around another survey, just asking folks to rank these three. And based on the results of that, I think perhaps we have, another meeting that, should probably be quicker, just to, and now that we've had, I think, this discussion and have a much better sense of which projects can be folded into existing tasks and things like that. Have a bit of a quick discussion and vote on a final scenario if that works. Does that seem okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. So I guess we'll hold off on an official vote. There'll be a ranking survey sent around. Appreciate everyone's patience. I think this is helpful, and we got to a good next step here. So
Looking to adjourn?
yes, I think we're definitely over. So I'll unless there are no other items, which I don't see any hands or anything, I'll ask for that motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I'll second.
All right, without objection, we're adjourned. So thank you, everybody, and we'll be in touch on
Take
next
care.
steps. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good one.